Hello students, welcome to Unskooler, India's exclusive e-learning platform. I'm Rahul, your mentor for social science today, and today's topic will be federalism. Let's start by talking about federalism. What is federalism? Before that, I'd like to ask you guys about when somebody asks you what is the system of government in the country. What form of government do we have? Normally, we use the first thing that comes to my mind is democracy. Sometimes we can say liberal democracy, but that is the form of government. There's something else which comes into the division of the government, which is called the mode of government. And that is where federalism comes in. So today we are going to talk about federalism, which is basically the mode of government. So let's start off with the definition. What is federalism? Federalism can be defined by saying the system of government where there is coordination between more than two parties. So basically, it is the mixed mode of government where there is more than two parties involved. In this case, one would be the central government, and the other could be a local, a provincial, or a regional government. That is basically the definition of federalism, where there is a system of government where there is more than two entities involved. That is the basic definition of federalism, and that can come as a question, so you can note that down. Second, we talk about key features. So, what is key feature? What are the key features of federalism? Now, as we talk about democracy, when we give an example of democracy, the first thing that will come to us when we ask about key features would be elections, voting. We get to choose our own government. Similarly, what are the key features of federalism? The key features of federalism is, first of all, there's more than two parties involved, minimum of two parties. One would be the central government and the other would be a local, like in India, it would be states. In some other places, it would be provinces. In some other countries, it would be regions. That's the first thing. Second point is the coordination between the two parties or more than two parties is always defined in a constitution. So it is not a vague or an informal thing. It is always the powers of both the center and the local is clearly defined in a constitution, like the Indian constitution, for example. The third would be in case of a conflict, as there are more than two parties, there can be a conflict, and most likely there always is a conflict in terms of power sharing. So that will be judged or adjudicated by a court or a higher authority. In India's case, it is the Supreme Court which determines the power jurisdiction between the center and the state. So those are the basic key features of a federal government. Another feature that you can write down or remember would be both the central and the local government has jurisdiction over the same people. So it is the citizenship remains the same. So would be an Indian would be governed by the central government as by the state government. Both of their laws apply. So the jurisdiction is over the same population, but in just different ways. We'll come to it when we talk about the lists, especially in case of India. So which government or which the central, local, which government looks after what topics. But basically, in short, the jurisdiction will always be the same. Then we talk about the different types of federations. So there are two broad definitions or the two broad types of federations. One is the coming together federation. Now the coming together federation is a classic example would be USA, United States of America. Coming together federation is where the states or the regions come together to give legitimacy to the central government. So, in the case of the United States, it's a purely federal form of government where the different states after the US Civil War came together and formed a country. One of the key features of a federalism is it is voluntary. So, the states or the local levels come together to create a nation and thereby give legitimacy to the center. The second would be holding together federation. A classic case would be India. In the case of India, comes from a top down. So in the case of coming together federation, it comes from the bottom down. So here we have the center, and here we have the regions. We can say the states. So from the coming together federation, it comes from the region to the center. So the regions come together to give legitimacy to the center. In holding together federation, it comes from the center to the regions. So the legitimacy of the regions is given by the center. It's basically vice versa. And that is why the name holding together and coming together. So the regions come together to create a country and give legitimacy to the center. Or in this case, it's holding together. So it's basically, there's always a tension in this form of government between the center and the state. As you can see from India, the center and states do not always agree. And that is why the situation is they are holding it together. The country is being held together basically by the constitution, which defines the powers, and by the Supreme Court, which adjudicates the power. So these are the two basic types of federalism. Now we come to an interesting case. One of those questions that you can note down, which gets asked very often, is what kind of country is India? Now for that, we need to ask, what is the other form of federalism? So one, you have federalism. The other, the opposite of federalism is unitary. Now, the unitary form of government is basically where the central government has all the power. It decides everything. Now, there are very few classical unitary forms of government left in the country, unless it is a dictatorial country, like for example Syria or erstwhile Libya. In the modern case, you can say one of those countries would be China, and the other would be Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka is a classic case because recently the long drawn out Tamil conflict ended. And one of the reasons given for the conflict was the total unitary nature of the country. In that case, no region, and specifically Sri Lanka, is a classic case of this kind of the problems of a unitary government, because it has a very large Tamil population. Though they are in a minority compared to the Sinhalese, but they're still substantial in number in terms of overall percentage of the population. As a result, what happened is their aspirations or their needs of the Tamil regions of Sri Lanka could not be met, or they could not be satisfied because the majority was Sinhalese. And Sinhalese people, the majority of the Sinhalese population were in the government. So that's why there are very few cases left in the world today of a classical unitary government. It could be a dictatorship where basically it's one person or one party or a group of people ruling things. But in a democratic government where you have elections, voting, Sri Lanka would be the best case of a unitary government. Now we come to as I was mentioning, the question, what kind of a structure does India follow? Now write this down, because this can come as a question, and it probably will come as a question, is what do we start off with? So the question is, what kind of form of government does India have? India has a government which is federal in nature, unitary in spirit. Now, this might be a bit confusing. I'll explain. So the form of government is federal, because we have a center and we have different states in India. But it is unitary in spirit, in the sense that if you look at the majority powers, it still vests with the center. The center has the maximum and the most important functions. As a result, and as I mentioned earlier, if students would remember, I was talking about defined powers in the constitution. And that's why when the constitution was made, or the constitution was ratified in 1950, founding fathers of the constitution made sure that despite it being a unitary government, despite it being a unitary in spirit kind of government, because it had so much diversity, like for example in India, each region or each state is almost a region. It has its different language, it has its different culture, different food habits. As a result, it was very important to uphold the federal nature of the government or of the country, because we were a newly independent country. Also, because partition had just happened, so it was very important to ensure the unity of the government, so that, or unity of the country, per se, so that there would be no regions who would be asking for independence, like we had in the 1960s and the 70s, the Khalistan movement in Punjab. As a result, we had to keep a balance. So the majority powers went with the center, but a lot of substantial powers came with the state. And as a result, we'll talk here the three lists. Now, these are the three lists which are clearly defined in the constitution. First is the union list. The union list means basically, as it says union, it's all the subjects or all the topics, or you can say all the responsibilities would be the better word, which the center has, which the center solely has. So, for example, foreign policy or defense. These are things which are the sole propriety of the center. The state plays no role in this. So, another would be the printing of currency. So, no state can print currency on its own. It's the RBI, which is under the center. Similarly, we don't have a ministry in the state, or a state government doesn't have a ministry for foreign affairs or for defense. That is exclusively in the center. Now we come to something called the state list, which every state, these are the topics which fall under every state. One would be the police. So, for example, you don't have a national police force. For example, you have paramilitary, you have the army, you have reserves. But basically, the police, we talk about Maharashtra police or Rajasthan police or UP police. So, police basically is an exclusive thing which comes under the state, not the center. Agriculture, irrigation, all these. So, you have an agriculture minister for state, you have a minister of irrigation for state. All these things are state. All these things are determined by the state. Next, we come to the concurrent list. Now, this is very unique when it comes to India, that we have a third list. Now, the third list is a responsibility of both. So, you have education, you have forestry. So, you will have a minister of forest for both. You'll have a minister of education for both. So, you have a minister, HRD minister, who basically looks after the education at the central government. You have a minister for state, let's say for the state of Maharashtra also. Now, in this case, as you can imagine, there's bound to be conflict.